and welcome back to the Richard Burton Art Centre and the YouTube channel. We've done a series of short videos just recently, and I hope you've enjoyed those. So the whole range of sort of the topics that we've covered, that I've covered as an artist, and what we're going to show you today really is we're going to do a longer form video, and we're going to do a mood and atmosphere landscape scene of the Yorkshire Wolds, in effect really, with the trees, a big sky, trees, and a relatively sort of straightforward landscape that will capture a little bit of a mood and atmosphere of probably a typical English summer really, with sort of foreboding clouds but nice colour greens and wonderful feels that will go with it. And this is sort of similar to what we're going to do today. Right, so here we are. I've got taped down the paper, 300 grams paper like we're used to using the other paintings. It's a not surface paper, so it's got a little bit of a rough texture to it, but it's nice and heavy and thick, so it will sit nicely on the board without buckling when we add water. Right, so now we're going to tackle the actual drawing, and the drawing is relatively straightforward. There's not a lot to it because it's going to be mostly drawn with the pen, but I just need to give an indication of the horizon, just a rough idea of the horizon, and sort of an indication of the fields and how they split and how they sort of recede into the distance, with a suggestion of where the foreground element of Istrest is going to be as well. So that's going to be really quite simple. So now we're going to start with the sky. It's a big sky, atmospheric sky, big cloud. There's a little bit of a warmth in the background, but obviously it's going to be sort of overshadowed with these sort of clouds that are sort of the storm or rainstorms are brewing really. We're going to mix a series of a very pale yellow ochre wash, which will go for the background, and then I'm going to mix a ultramarine blue and a Prussian blue for the blue sky that's coming through the cloud. And then I'm going to mix a stronger altogether mix of grey, firstly with a neutral grey, which is going to be ultramarine blue and burnt umber. That's a soft grey that I'll put into the sort of higher level clouds, just to give a little bit of a tone to those clouds. And then I'm going to finalise with the big clouds, which are going to be ultramarine and burnt umber, with a touch of alizarin crimson, which is just going to be like the 3 primary grey that we've talked about in the past, and that will just give a nice little bit of depth to the grey and the depth to the clouds, and they'll sort of hang into the sky and give that sort of extra dynamics to the clouds. So now we've got the sky in. I've let that dry purposely. So now we're going to wet an element of the sky, put some water, just moisten the paper, and then we're going to start with purple wash in the distance, which is just going to be like very pale alizarin crimson, and then we're going to transform that into a purple blue grey for the distant hills, distant fields really, in the very far distance, which are just sort of disappearing into that mist and haze that's caused by the sky. And that's all going onto a moist surface, and that's going to be ultramarine blue with a little bit of alizarin crimson, and we'll put that in and bring that down into the sky. Then I'm going to transition and change it to a brighter green as I come down. First of all, I'm going to start with raw sienna and ultramarine blue, which with a hint of Prussian blue, which will just give that sort of distant green. It works well with raw sienna, it just gives that distant green, which is lovely. I'll then come forward, I'll then start to add more ultramarine blue, Prussian blue and sort of a lemon yellow, which will give a brighter green as I come forward, and I'll just transition it forward. As I come to the very foreground, I'm then going to add much more ultramarine blue, Prussian blue, a lemon yellow, and develop a brighter green in the foreground. So I get that feeling of recession as I come into the picture, and it brings stronger colours in the foreground. So we've got the sky and the earth in place with the sort of tones that give that feeling of recession. Now we're going to add some woodland, the hedges and the trees again. So again, we're going to wet the horizon and start with a blue-green combination of ultramarine blue and alizarin crimson. And we're going to put those onto the horizon, just sort of so they initially diffuse, and then we're going to bring them into the, just dance the brush along the surface to give that feeling of distant hedges. As we come down, we're going to be more onto dry paper, and we're going to add a little bit of raw sienna and paint from the horizon downwards with horizontal brushstrokes to capture those distant woodlands. Now as we come a little bit further forward, we're going to continue that process, make a more distinct green woodland colour using ultramarine blue, say Prussian blue, and a bit of raw sienna, and probably a touch of alizarin crimson, and continue painting the trees and hedges into the landscape as we come forward. I'm going to try and vary those greens and make some of them darker as you paint the foreground areas, while the woodland areas are still moist and some of the shadows using ultramarine blue. So it just gives them a little bit of texture and a little bit of depth to those trees, particularly as we come into the foreground, and probably add a little bit of burnt umber into that, really, just to give that a little bit more dynamic. And then I'm going to let that dry once again. When it's thoroughly dry, it's now time to add the additional shadow details, objects and the really strong darks that can give that extra interest to the painting, such as a gate or the impression of some sort of animals in the fields. And as a general rule for the shadows, I use blue greys in the background and a darker green greys in the foreground, which sort of give that extra dynamic to the final touches, really. And then the very final element, I will then get my craft knife. So now it's dry again. I've got the craft knife, as you can see. It obviously needs to have a fresh sharp point on it. What I'm going to use this now to just tease up the surface of the paper and give some of those highlights into some of the issues, some of the structures, some of the buildings in the background that might be just catching a bit of light. Anything that's catching a little bit of reflection from the light that's coming through the clouds on the horizon, and also into the picture will do nicely. And also I'm going to use it to to tease up a little bit of focus and a little bit of highlight into the immediate foreground, where I put those little bit of rough ground with the sort of extra long grasses and such like that. Just give an extra bit of focus to the foreground. And then really it's just a case of putting a mount on and let's have a look. So there we have it, the final picture. Obviously I put a mount on it as usual, just to give it a little bit of a show it off at its best. But in essence, now it's dried, I'm looking at it, and I feel it gives that sort of mood and atmosphere to a sort of a country wolds, Yorkshire wolds sort of scene. So I hope you've enjoyed that. I hope you found sort of useful, giving that sort of feel for the sort of mood and atmosphere in that simple landscape. Now if you like these videos, once again I'm going to ask you to please like and subscribe. It just helps us and to enable us to get picked up by the algorithms, and then hopefully we'll be seen by a wider audience. And so for now, that's another of our longer format videos. I hope you enjoyed that, and until next time, keep painting.